So not everyone out there knows exactly how to put a freestyle scooter together. There's multiple different ways. You've got IHC, you've got HRC, you've got SES, different bars, different decks, different wheels, different forks, you name it. So what we're gonna do today is go through the list, show you how everything works together, and hopefully don't miss a thing. And hope that this makes life easier for you when it comes to building your own complete scooter. So as you can see in front of me, I do have an NVKOS S7 to begin with. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to tear this one down and use it as a base, and then we're gonna start talking about the different components. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna quickly tear this down. I'm gonna start off with just the deck. All right, so we've torn everything off this scooter, including the grip tape, because that is where we're gonna start first. When building a complete scooter, it's always better to start from the bottom and make your way up. So we're gonna start off with the grip tape. First thing I like to do with the grip tape is, if it has a logo like this Scooter Hut DNA sheet does, is figuring out where I want it to be in relation to the rest of the deck. So with this one here, I want it to be quite central. So I'm gonna find out whereabouts center is for me. And luckily enough, it's actually at the end of the sheet of the grip tape here. Now I'm not gonna do a full sheet of grip tape. I'm gonna cut it off at the head tube here. So now I know that that's my mark. I'm gonna flip this upside down. Got our pen. We're just gonna mark where the head tube ends here. Give that a little mark. Move the deck out of the way. Got a ruler. Gonna just rule a nice straight line on that. Make sure it is straight. Looks like it. Gonna grab myself a Stanley knife, making sure you can get your parents to help you with this part. If you're too young to be using this, don't use knives. If you're not old enough, you can use scissors as well. I personally like to use a Stanley knife. We're just gonna cut across that line that we just made. Gonna peel it off. Slap that bad boy on. Now it is easiest when applying grip tape if you do take the break off, like I have so far here. It just makes it 10 times easier when it comes to cutting the grip tape to shape. Next up, we're gonna grab ourselves an Allen key. I have one here. We're gonna go around the edges of the grip tape and grind it off like this. So what this is doing is giving us sort of a template of where we're gonna cut our line. It also makes it a little bit easier to cut the sides when it comes to that point, because you've sort of made almost like a tracing line to follow with the knife. All right, so now we've got our blade. We're going to the front of the grip tape here. We're just gonna take our time to get the first little cut. Make sure we don't go too fast. As soon as we've got that, now we're gonna follow down our trace line. Nice and steady. Boom. Last thing we want to do with the grip tape is to put the holes for the brake back in. So I'm just going to grab a slightly smaller Allen key here, find where the hole of the bolt is. We're just going to punch this through. Same thing, go back in with our blade and just clean that up. Now we're going to chuck the brake back on. All right, and there we go. We now have the deck gripped. So next thing I like to do is chuck on the back wheel. But before we do that, I want to talk about the differences in wheels. We've got different diameters, so let's just quickly run through them now. All right, so as far as wheels go, we have a few different dimensions, as I briefly spoke about just before. We have 110 millimeters, which is the standard size wheel you're going to find. We have 120 millimeters in diameter. And then we also have a 30 millimeter wide wheel. So both the two here, the 110 and the 120, have a 24 millimeter diameter. Then this one right here is a bit special with a 30 millimeter wide urethane diameter. Depending on your setup, depends on the type of wheel you can use as well, because not every single scooter is going to be rated for the 30 mil wide or even 120 millimeters. So before you do purchase, let's say a deck or even a fork, make sure the wheel that you are purchasing as well, or you already have pre-existing, is going to fit with the product that you are getting. So for instance, this tilt fork I've got on the back here, this is going to fit a 110 millimeter wheel, no problem at all. As you can see, It's got enough space on either side of the fork as well as the top to freely spin. And then if I got this 120mm wheel, same thing, I've got enough room for it to freely spin. However, this 30mm wheel, as you can see, it won't even fit into the fork. And that is because these forks are rated for 110, 120, but only 24mm wide. So again, whenever you are purchasing a wheel, make sure it's gonna work with your fork as well as the back of the scooter deck, because not all wheels will also fit in the cutout here, as well as on the brake. If you have any questions when it comes to purchasing these things, do hit us up, slide into our DMs or leave us a comment below on this video. We're always happy to give you a helping hand when it comes to product questions. So continuing on with this build, we are gonna stick with the 30mm by 120mm MV wheels. We're gonna chuck them back in now. So it doesn't matter whether you've purchased a complete scooter or you've purchased just the deck alone, all decks will come with the hardware needed to put the back wheel on. So they're gonna come with brake, they're also gonna come with an axle, and they're gonna come with spacers. So in the case of this particular deck, we do also have some nylon dropouts. So we're gonna chuck them back in the deck. Not every scooter will come with nylon dropouts or dropouts at all. So it does completely depend on the deck that you have. We're gonna grab our axle. We're gonna chuck that into the dropout here. And actually put it in the other side because it doesn't go in that way. Luckily for this Envy deck, it does have some rails to help you line up the spaces in the back. Not every scooter has this luxury, so it can be a little bit fiddly, but just remember, no matter what, your spaces need to go in between the dropouts of the deck and your wheel for it to all work properly. So now we're gonna grab our wheel again. We're gonna chuck that in between the center. There we go. So now that we've got the axle through, we need to start tightening it up. Depending on your scooter, you'll usually either have a 6mm bolt or you will have a 5mm bolt. That is just the standard across scootering. And as said, you're either going to have some self-tightening spaces or dropouts, and sometimes you are going to have a nut on the end. It all depends on which scooter you have. Give that a nice tighten, make sure the wheel spins freely, we're good to go. Now, comes the fun part. We're going to talk about compression systems. Compression systems will include your fork, your clamp, and even your bars. They all need to work together to make sure that your compression system is going to work. So we've got SES, HRC, as well as IHC, which is the current standard across the scootering market. Let me grab them for you. Okay, so in front of me, we have 3 different types of forks and we've got 2 different types of clamps. Let's talk about the forks first. What came on this scooter, which is why the wheel is still on, is an IHC fork. This one here is going to be SES/HRC. Same goes for this one, SES and HRC. But first, let's talk about HRC. So, if you're wanting to run HRC, you are going to need an HRC kit, which I do have one here from Root Industries. Usually the forks will not come with a HRC kit, so do make sure that if you are wanting to run HRC, which also stands for Hidden Internal Compression System, that you do grab yourself a HRC kit as well. So I'll quickly show you how HRC works. First thing we're going to actually have to do, which I should have done before, is chuck the headset in, which I've left down here. Now, one thing I always say when you are putting a headset in is think of them like arrowheads. So as you can see here, there is a slight concave on the top of the headset. We're going to think of that as the top of an arrowhead, and which way the arrowhead goes is facing into the deck. So if we're putting this into the top of the deck, we're going to face the arrowhead down, put that in the top. And the same goes for this one. If we've got an arrowhead facing up, we're going to put that in the bottom of the deck. And that's the best way to make sure that your headsets go in the correct way. So as I said, let's start off with the HRC fork first. So we're going to place this like any old regular fork up at the base of the head tube here. Now we're going to grab our smaller compression ring here. There's 2 different sizes you can ever find. One is going to be the standard small one here, and one is going to be specifically for IHC. You can tell which one's which by the IHC one is actually a little bit thicker than the standard one. So IHC we don't currently need. Standard one, we are going to put that in between the fork here and the headset, and that's going to stop any wobble of the fork. Next thing we're gonna do, it depends if you wanna run a headset cap or not. I'm just gonna say no, because I don't know where the headset cap's gone right now. We're gonna grab our HIC kit. So the way that this works, HIC kit goes over the top of the fork. Put that down. Then we've got a compression cap as well as a bolt here. And we use that to tighten into the fork here. So what that does is it's now got 2 points of force through the top of the head tube here. So let me just tighten this down so it doesn't go anywhere. As you can see now, the fork is locked in, and that is because we have 2 separate areas of force. We got force on the bottom of the deck by the fork being pushed into the base of the head tube here, and then we've got force on the top with the HIC cap pushing down, which means that your fork is now locked into your deck. Now this is where things start to get tricky, because now that we've got a HIC fork, we need a clamp as well as a bar that is going to work with this setup. So I'm gonna get rid of this stuff. We don't need this right now. We also don't need this clamp because this is an SES clamp. We'll talk about that soon. What we need is an oversized double clamp, and we need an oversized pair of steel chromoly bars. Let me get them. All right, so as said, we do have an oversized double clamp, which is gonna work with our HIC. Chuck that down there. However, we have 2 sets of bars that look pretty identical. However, one is gonna work and one is not. So let's start with the one that doesn't work and explain why it doesn't work. So this pair of chromoly bars right here is a standard pair of chromoly bars. And what that means is it has a standard size internal diameter. That's where the issue lies. As to run HIC, you need an oversized internal diameter. So if I was to try put these bars on the HIC kit, doesn't fit. Same will also go for if you have a pair of aluminium bars, as aluminium bars will always have a standard inner diameter. I'll talk more about aluminium bars later on. So same thing, the bars are not gonna fit over the HIC kit. So that is where these ones come in. They are oversized. So as you can see here, the bar, with a little bit of force obviously, will go over the HIC kit. Before I force it on too much, I want to talk about one other thing, which is the slit, which is very important when it comes to running HIC. So the way that HIC works is, now we've obviously talked about how the fork is staying there. Now we want to talk about how the bar actually attaches to the HIC kit and the fork. So we chuck our handy dandy trusty oversized double clamp here. Most clamps these days will come as oversized as standard and come with a shim, which will make them compatible with a standard size bar as well. However, do make sure before you purchase one, as there is a couple of clamps out there that do still come standard diameter only, so they're not gonna fit on an oversized pair of bars. So this little slit in the bar that I'm talking about here, that is what's going to compress your bar to the top of the fork here to make sure they don't come off. If you do not have this slit, there's nothing for the clamp to clamp down and get snugly set into the top of the HIC/fork here. So if I had a bar without a slit, I tighten this clamp down as hard as I could, there's no compression because the bar is not going to compress inwards. So always make sure that you have a slit in your bars when you're running HIC. So again, I'm not gonna push them all the way down, but the next thing you do is chuck the bars on top, down they go, tighten up your clamp, and you're pretty much good to go. So that is pretty much how HIC works. Key notes to take away: you need an oversized pair of bars, you need an SES/HIC fork that is compatible, and of course you need an oversized double clamp. That's pretty much all you need to know about running HIC. Let's move on to SES. I'm gonna talk about SES compression. SES stands for Standard Compression System, and that is because once upon a time, it was the standard to go to. Forks going up inside of the head tube, exactly as previously spoken about with the HIC. We still have our standard compression ring. So chuck the fork up through there, make sure the headset is still snugly fit, put the standard compression ring on there. And this is where it gets a little bit different to HIC. First thing we're going to want to do is actually put the clamp directly on the fork. So I don't know where I put that other SES clamp, but I do know I have one over here. Got one right here from Tilt. We're gonna chuck this on top of the fork first. So sometimes it may be a little bit tight. Let's see what we're working with here. Yep, it's a little bit tight. That is fine though, because I have a trick for that, which I'm glad that's actually a little bit tight because I wanted to show this trick anyway. So we're gonna talk about the coin trick. Oh, there we go. We got a 20-cent piece. This is why it's called the coin trick, because we generally just use a coin. So what we're gonna do here is actually these two bottom bolts here on the SES clamp, we're just gonna remove them quickly. Next thing we're gonna want to do is actually take one of those bolts we've just removed, put it in the opposite side of the clamp, making sure that the thread is the correct way. So slowly tightening that down. There we go. And then the next thing we want to do is remember that 20-cent piece we had, we're actually going to chuck it in between. Sorry, I just need to hold this while talking about it. Let's chuck it in between the two here. Now we don't want to tighten this down too much. We want to go a little bit at a time. All right, I've tightened that down a little bit, not too much. I just want to see if I've got enough already. Look at that. Look how easy that went on now with the coin trick. So now that we've got that on, what we're going to do is just loosen this bolt again, making sure we have the SES as well as our forks as straight as possible, because once you move this bolt, it might be a little bit difficult to move the SES around. That was sort of cool, to be honest. Actually, before we put these bolts back in, I've come across one more issue, and it's not, again, necessarily going to be an issue for every single fork and clamp combo that you get, but with these two, as well as this deck, we do have a slight problem which we need to address now. So you're probably asking, Sean, what's the issue? The issue actually lays within the length of the fork here. As you can see, I hope you can see, just down in the SES here, the fork is actually coming just past where our compression cap inside this SES is going to want to sit. It needs to be a little bit lower than what it currently is. So what that means is the SES needs to be raised just a tiny bit. So what we're gonna do, headset cap, chuck that on top. And that is automatically gonna make this sit a little bit lower within the SES clamp. But there's one more thing I wanna talk about, just in case you come across this issue. If you put the headset cap on and the fork is still a little bit too long, you want to make sure you can grab yourself one of these, which is a headset spacer. Just goes over the top of the fork and it just provides a little bit of extra height on the SES clamp. With the headset here, I don't think we're actually going to need this, but it's always handy to know if you ever need more room, you can just grab one of these headset spacers in store or online. So I've still got the SES stretched here. I'm going to chuck that on top. And now Lockie, I want you to come over here again. As you can see, the lip that I was talking about where the compression cap sits is now far higher than what the top of the fork tube is. We can now use that gap to help compress that compression ring down. But as I said, this issue is not going to be with every fork, deck and clamp combo. Sometimes you're gonna get it and you're not gonna have an issue at all. It sits perfectly fine. Other times you're gonna have to make sure you use your headset cap. Other times you might actually have to use a headset spacer. It all is dependent on the scooter that you're putting together. So we've got our compression cap as well as the bolt, which will come with your SES. I'm gonna chuck that in the top, get our bolt, and then we are going to tighten that down. And there we go, that's nice and tight now. So the fork as well as the clamp is not gonna go anywhere. All right, so let's talk about the bars. I've got my trusty standard and oversized bars back here. Now, the oversized ones here in my hand are not going to work with this SES clamp, and it's not because they're oversized, it's because of this slit. So, if you're using SES, you cannot be using a slit in your bars. The reason being is when you've got a HIC kit, this actually goes up inside the internal diameter of the bar. I'm not going to push it all the way in, but it pretty much will plug that slit. And that is because the slit is going to compress onto the HIC kit. Now, if we chucked it within an SES, there's nothing to actually plug here, which means it's going to compress in pretty much as far as you can tighten it, and it's going to end up cracking your bars. So if you are running SES, you cannot run a slit. Now, there's one thing we can do to fix that. We do have SES bar adapters. So we have a standard size and we also have an oversized, depending on which kind of bar you have. So let's say we want to use this oversized bar here. I want to make sure this is the oversized diameter, which is 31.8. So I'm going to just grab this out. Now what this does is it goes up inside the internal diameter of the bar and it's going to plug it. So you make sure that that slit, as we were talking about, is now plugged up and it's not going to compress in too far that in this SES compression, you're going to end up cracking your bars. I'm not going to put it in, as I said before, because it can be a little bit tight. When you do push these in, it can be a little bit tricky to get back out. So if you wanted to run SES with a slit, this is the only way you can do it. Now, SES doesn't matter whether you have an oversized bar or not. All that matters is about that slit. So this standard size bar here does not have a slit. So this one will just go in the top here. You'll tighten it down as per normal and you're ready to go with your SES compression. Whenever tightening up an SES, you want to tighten one, skip one. So what I mean by that is you tighten the top bolt a little bit, skip the middle bolt. Tighten the bottom one a little, or the second from the bottom a little bit, skip back up to the top. So on and so forth. You never want to just tighten down vertically because it's just going to give you an uneven sort of grip on the bar as well as the fork here. So yeah, you just want to make sure you do them. Do one, skip one, do one, skip one, do one, skip one, do one, skip one, so on and so forth. That's pretty much how SES works though. All right, so last but not least, we're going to talk about IHC again. So just like all the other previous forks, we're just going to put the IHC fork up the head tube here. However, you're going to notice one thing. See all that wobble? That is because we don't have the correct compression ring in. So we're going to remove that and grab the one we were talking about earlier, which is the IHC specific compression ring. And this is because IHC forks are a tiny little bit slimmer than that HIC and SES forks. So they do need a slightly thicker compression ring. So we're going to chuck that in, get rid of that wobble. Next thing we're going to do is, I don't know where I put it, but we need the IHC shim. Here's the IHC shim. So what the IHC shim does is it goes over the top. We're just going to grab our headset cap, chuck that on. The IHC shim goes over the top here, onto the top of the fork. Then we're going to grab the IHC compression bolt, which is quite long, and I almost dropped it. And that's going to go down into the top of the fork here. So much like the HIC, this works in the similar sort of way with the compression being held together by the two different forces coming up from the base of the head tube and coming down from the top of the head tube. Except the major difference between the two is HIC will only work with oversized bars and IHC will work with standard size bars. The reason for this is because IHC just pretty much came about because it wanted to be a slightly lighter alternative to HIC. So you're going to have a slightly smaller, slimmer fork, which means you're also going to be using a slightly smaller, slimmer internal diameter of a bar. Boom. And there we go. That is nice and tight. And the fork is compressed to the deck and it's not going anywhere. Now, I've just realized I probably contradicted myself, I think that's the right word, by saying IHC only works with standard diameter bars. Well, there is another little hack we can do here, which is the IHC to HIC compression thing, top kit. That's what I'm talking about. So before I tighten this down and put the standard diameter bars on, let's quickly talk about this. So all that this is it's basically a way that you convert your, so this is pretty much a way that you can convert your IHC fork into a HIC fork so you can use it with your oversized bars. So if you do, for whatever reason, want to run oversized bars, but you only have an IHC fork, you can get yourself an IHC to HIC conversion kit. However, we're not going to be using that today. We are going to be using just the IHC as is, and we're going to be using a set of aluminium bars. So we're back with our aluminium bars. So aluminium bars are like a hybrid between an oversized and a standard bar. What I mean by that is because these are aluminium, they've actually got a slightly thicker wall than what the standard steel chromoly bars have. And that is just because the aluminium, although it is lighter, is a little bit weaker than standard steel chromoly. So to combat that, they have a slightly thicker wall. with that slightly thicker wall, on the external diameter, they're going to be the same as an oversized bar, but the internal diameter is actually going to be the same as a standard bar. Takes a bit to get your head around, but all you need to think about when you get a set of aluminium bars is that they're standard diameter on the inside, which what that means, IHC is going to work with a standard diameter bar. We've got a standard diameter bar right here. So we're going to chuck our double clamp on. Remember now making sure that because it is oversized on the outside, that the double clamp can work with oversized bars. Give this a little bang on the floor, it's just always easier. There we go. Make sure the wheel is nice and straight, which for the purpose of this video, I'm not really gonna look at it too much, so it's probably not straight. And we're just gonna tighten the clamp down. And there you have it, a fully complete scooter. Except for one more thing, the hand grips. So, there's two ways you can put hand grips on. Well, there's two of the easiest and standard ways you can put hand grips on. One is with an air compressor. However, not everyone has access to a hair compressor. One thing that most people do have access to is hairspray. So why do we use hairspray to get grips onto handlebars? It's pretty simple actually. Trying to put rubber grips on steel or aluminium bars without any form of lubrication or the air to help that pass through, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very, very hard. So what we do with the hairspray is we spray it inside the internal diameter of the grip here, which lubricates it up. We slide the grip on, but then because it's hairspray, it actually gets sticky over time once it dries. So what that means is we can get it on nice and easy, leave it for about half an hour to an hour, depending on how hot it is wherever you are, until the hairspray dries, and the grip should be nice and stuck on there. Get the hairspray, not too much, just enough to lubricate it up to help us get it on the bar here. Slide that on. There we go, one on. Now, depending again on the size of the bar, you're either gonna have steel chromoly bar size or you're going to have aluminium bar size bar ends. Because these are aluminium, I'm gonna chuck the aluminium bar ends in. They're just slightly a little bit smaller for the smaller internal diameter of the aluminium bars, whereas steel ones have a slightly larger bar end. Most hand grips come with both sizes. But that's pretty much the fastest way I can show you of how to put together a custom complete scooter. As you can see, especially when it comes to compression systems, it can be a little bit confronting and tedious. So we may have not gone over every single thing in this video. So if you do have any further questions, let us know in the comments below, or we'll make sure to make some follow-up videos further down the line. If you are wanting to purchase a few custom parts to put together at home yourself, do feel free to reach out to our helpful team at Scooter Hut, either online or in-store, who can help you along the way to build the scooter that you want and make sure that everything is going to work together straight out the box. But apart from that, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you in the next video. Cheers.